The first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a seed catalog and a letter from my granddaughter. Unauthorized vegetation, it read. With a 50 fine attached, I stared at it, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Who fines someone for growing flowers? Have you ever dealt with an unfair HOA or difficult neighbor? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I'm Eleanor, retired history teacher, and for 30 years I've turned my modest quarter-acre into a sanctuary of blooms and butterflies. My garden wasn't just flowers. It was my legacy, my therapy after losing my husband Robert 5 years earlier. Each plant held a memory: peonies from our first home, irises from my mother's garden, roses Robert had given me on our anniversary. Maple Creek Estates had always been particular about appearances, but my garden had never been an issue before. That changed when Margaret Henderson became HOA president. She moved in 6 months ago with her sterile landscape of identical shrubs and flawless green lawn that looked like it had been painted rather than grown. The second notice came 2 weeks later: failure to comply with landscaping guidelines. Another 50 fine. I called the HOA office. "Margaret Henderson speaking," came the crisp voice. "I'm Eleanor Thompson from Willow Lane. I received these violation notices about my garden." "Ah, yes, Mrs. Thompson. Your property is in violation of Section 4.2 regarding uniform landscaping standards. But my garden has been here for 30 years. No one's ever complained before. Previous administrations were lax. I'm bringing Maple Creek back to its original vision of uniformity and property values." "Uniformity? My garden increases property values. It won Best Garden in the county last year." "Sentimental value doesn't trump community standards, Mrs. Thompson. You have 30 days to bring your property into compliance." The line went dead. I sat at my kitchen table, looking out at my garden, my life's work, and felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years: fight. What would you have done in my place? Fight back or walk away? I decided to fight. First, I researched the HOA bylaws. Section 4.2 was vague, mentioning uniformity, but never defining what that meant. I took pictures of every house on our street, noting the variations in landscaping. Some had no flowers at all, others had different styles. I wasn't the outlier. I was being targeted. The third notice arrived with a 100 fine and a threat of lien against my property if I didn't remediate the unauthorized vegetation. This time, I responded in writing, citing the bylaws and requesting a specific definition of uniform landscaping standards. Margaret's response was chilling. "The HOA board determines compliance. Non-compliance will result in additional fines." I started documenting everything. Every notice, every conversation, every interaction. I reached out to neighbors, discreetly asking their opinions of my garden. To my surprise, many loved it but were afraid to speak up. "I think what you've done is beautiful, Eleanor," whispered Sarah from next door, glancing around as if Margaret might appear. "But she's made an example of others who crossed her. The Hendersons have money and connections." The fines kept coming: 200, 300, 500. My savings were dwindling. I had no idea the next letter in my mailbox would change everything. One morning, I found a plain envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a note. "I know what you're going through. She did the same to me. Call me." The voice on the other end was hesitant. "My name is David. I lived in Maple Creek 3 years ago. Margaret fined me for my non-conforming mailbox until I sold my house at a loss." "Why are you contacting me now?" "Because I saw what she was doing to you in the community newsletter. They listed all the violations and fines. I have something that might help." We met at a coffee shop across town. David slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos of Margaret's backyard, a lush, elaborate garden completely different from her sterile front yard. "Section 4.2 applies to all visible landscaping," David explained. "She's violating her own rules." I had no idea the next letter in my mailbox would change everything. Armed with this information, I requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. Margaret tried to block it, but HOA bylaws required she grant the request when a homeowner formally asked. The hearing was tense. I laid out my case, showing the vague bylaws, the inconsistent enforcement, and the escalating fines. Then I presented the photos of Margaret's garden. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's face went pale. "These are private property," she snapped. "You had no right. Section 4.2 applies to all landscaping visible from any point," I countered calmly. "Your backyard is visible from the second story of several homes. You've been fining me while violating the very rules you claim to enforce." For a moment, I thought we might reach a resolution. The board seemed sympathetic, promising to review the bylaws and consider a more reasonable approach. "I think we can work something out, Eleanor," said one board member. "Perhaps a compromise." Margaret nodded reluctantly. "Yes, perhaps we were too hasty. We'll put a hold on further fines while we review the situation." I left feeling hopeful. Maybe this was over. Maybe reason had prevailed. I should have known better. 2 days later, I received an eviction notice. Not from the HOA, but from my landlord. I had rented my home since Robert passed away, preferring the flexibility over home ownership at my age. The notice cited violation of lease terms regarding property appearance. When I called my landlord, he was apologetic but firm. "Margaret Henderson is on the board of the property management company that owns your building. She threatened to pull their contract if I didn't evict you. I was being forced from my home of 30 years because of my garden." That's when I knew reasoning wouldn't work. Margaret wasn't interested in fairness or compromise. She was on a power trip. And I was just her latest victim. I called David again. "I need a good lawyer," I said. "Someone who isn't afraid of a fight." He recommended a local attorney who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. When I showed her my documentation, she smiled. "Eleanor, this is harassment, plain and simple. And the eviction notice? That's retaliation. We have a very strong case." We filed a lawsuit against the HOA, Margaret personally, and the property management company. The complaint detailed the selective enforcement, the harassment, the emotional distress, and the illegal retaliation. The response was swift and vicious. Margaret countersued, claiming I had defamed her character and caused emotional distress. The local paper picked up the story, and suddenly I was the talk of Maple Creek. Some neighbors shunned me, but others quietly offered support. Sarah brought me casseroles and told me she was documenting Margaret's behavior toward other residents. Tom from down the street revealed that Margaret had tried to fine him for his unapproved patio furniture until he threatened to lawyer up. As the court date approached, the pressure mounted. I received anonymous letters telling me to drop it and move on. My lawyer advised me to stay vigilant. The day before our court appearance, I got a call from my lawyer. "The HOA's attorney wants to talk settlement. They're offering to drop all fines and complaints if you'll drop your lawsuit." "What about the eviction notice?" I asked. "They'll withdraw that too." I thought about it briefly. I could have my life back, my home back, but nothing would change. Margaret would still be in power, still targeting others. "No," I said. "I want this to stop, not just for me, but for everyone in Maple Creek." The settlement negotiations were tense. Margaret refused to admit any wrongdoing. But the evidence against her was mounting not just from me, but from other residents who had come forward with their own stories of harassment. In the end, they offered $75,000 to settle the case, withdraw the eviction notice, change the landscaping bylaws to be more reasonable, and remove Margaret from her position as HOA president. I accepted. The settlement was announced in the local paper, but the sweetest moment came when I saw Margaret packing her boxes. She was moving to another community, hopefully, one that would appreciate her vision of uniformity. What's the sweetest justice you've ever seen? Today, my garden still flourishes in Maple Creek. The new bylaws specifically protect established gardens of merit and allow for reasonable personal expression in landscaping. Several neighbors have started their own gardens, inspired by what they once saw as a liability. Sometimes, on a quiet evening, I sit on my porch and watch the butterflies dance among my flowers. I think about Robert and how proud he would have been, not of the money, but of the stand I took. Gardens, like justice, require patience and persistence. They face storms and droughts, but with care and attention, they flourish. And sometimes, They changed not just a yard, but an entire community. Have you ever had to stand up for something you believed in, even when it was difficult? What gave you the strength to keep going? Share your stories in the comments below.